Coming up on Chopper's Political Podcast.
If Nigel Farage wanted to pick up the phone and get a hold of the President of the United States, he would do it.
Welcome back to Chopper's Political Podcast, where I bring you the best guest gossip, news and stories from our studio at GB News here in the heart of Westminster. It's been a week when British investors and pensioners and probably some people in the government too have looked through their fingers as the stock market has plunged in response to Donald Trump's imposition of global tariffs. China's retaliated and the UK has slapped an extra 50% tariff, taking up their tariff on China to 104%. China adding up to 84% back on the US. Hang on. Rebecca, that's wrong. It's out of date already. Let's get this right. Right, correction. Sorry. What's happened now overnight? Apparently Donald Trump has frozen for 90 days the existing tariff structure. Everyone else has 10%, but the car makers have 25% plus some other tariffs for steel. It's very complicated anyway. Bear with me, it's moving very quickly. A good week perhaps for Sir Keir Starmer then to unveil plans for a new Big Dipper, a roller coaster up in Bedford, in Bedfordshire, with Universal, a rival, if you might say, to Disneyland in Paris. On this week's episode then, we're talking about what Trump is up to explain it to our viewers and listeners, and listen to this podcast as soon as we can with Gerry Gunster, a US public affairs expert and a friend of Nigel Farage. And in a week when three groups of Labour backbenchers, the Labour Growth Group, the Red Wall Labour Group and Blue Labour, have urged the government to bring in digital IDs to help crack down on illegal migration, we're talking to Jake Richards, the Labour MP from Rother Valley, about that and also the grooming gangs scandal. Plus today, Friday the 11th of April, is World Parkinson's Day, and I'm joined by the British journalist and podcaster of Movers and Shakers, Rory Kettleton-Jones, later to shine light on this disease. First, to my guest, Gerry Gunster, the CEO at Gunster Strategies Worldwide, to try and understand what on earth is going on in the land of Donald Trump. Gerry Gunster, thank you for joining us today on Chopper's Political Podcast in a rollercoaster week for you in Washington, but also for the rest of the world as we get battered by these pronouncements from Donald Trump and his obviously famously these tariffs imposed on the world last week. What do you think he's up to?
Well, first of all, Chris, as always, good to be back on your podcast. I think a lot of people are still trying to figure out exactly what he's up to, but I can tell you what has transpired over the last, say, 72 hours. It is my understanding that Secretary Ludnick, Secretary Steve Bessent, and Jamieson Greer, the United States Trade Representative, had been meeting with the president since Sunday and going through a bunch of scenarios with respect to what they are seeing in the market, which was last week. Whoever you want to ask will tell you it's somewhere between 2.4 and 5 trillion worth of value in the market that dropped. And they sat down with the president and said, well, in addition, we've got 75 countries who have asked to speak with you to cut, quote unquote, some kind of deal. What is it you'd like to do, Mr. President? And apparently the three of them sat down and came to a decision that we need to pause this for 90 days and go back to the 10%, go back to that bottom starting there, and let's reset here for 90 days. And that's my understanding about what has transpired over the last 72 hours. Thankfully, it says, I think, a little bit about President Trump, that he is willing to listen to some of the experts that are in the room, particularly Bessent, because he is a bond person and saw the potential there, what was going on with the bond market.
That's right.
Now, with that said, Chris, of course, you listened to the president's office yesterday, and they're all saying, this is exactly the way that we planned.
Yeah, we should explain to listeners and viewers, we're speaking on Thursday lunchtime, and of course we'll watch the Oval Office he's signing executive orders, and then did a press conference late in the evening on Wednesday night, and then he said he decided earlier on Wednesday to take this action, possibly after those three wise men came to see him and said, are you looking at the bond markets? Because if the bond markets go the wrong way, you're really in trouble, President Trump. Over in the UK here, the Daily Mail, one of our big mass market tabloids, says Trump blinked. He wouldn't accept that, but is that what happened?
Look, I think, again, the truth is somewhere in between, right? Between what's coming out of the White House and the reality of what we're seeing with the bonds or what we're seeing with the market. Now, their position is we didn't blink because this was always about China. And so if you really want to look at it, the president is still saying, this is still about China. I've got 124% now tariff this morning on China. And this is the people that we need to go after, which is going to be really fascinating. And Chris, I don't know if you remember this, but in 16 and 20, between 2016 and 20, they did the same thing. China retaliated with freezing all agricultural products into the United States.
Well,
that required then the United States government to actually pay the farmers for the losses that they got as a result of China stopping the agricultural tariff. So we're in a game of chicken with China. We'll see how this all works out. Both sides had a lot to lose. China obviously we are their largest client. So there's a serious game of chicken going on here.
Yeah, between two superpowers.
Yes.
Who's he thinking of, Donald Trump? Is he thinking of the blue-collar workers restoring the US to a manufacturing country, but ignoring the middle-class workers and others who have stocks and shares and worry about that evaporation of all that wealth on the stock markets? Who's his audience for what he's up to with tariffs?
Well, his audience is that blue-collar worker, the red states that got him elected. This is a protectionist tactic. And he really believes that if he puts enough pressure on companies in this country that are manufacturing in China, India, Vietnam, and Mexico, that they are eventually going to come around and say, okay, we'll go ahead and start building these things in the United States and bring back, the glory days of manufacturing in the U.S. Now, that's a lot to ask because, as you know, Chris, companies work on 3, 5, 10-year cycles.
Yeah.
So these companies are going to have a hard time just pivoting overnight and saying, well, we just invested all this money in a facility in Mexico. You just want us to abandon it? So there's a lot that's got to go into this.
And that all that costs money. I guess, again, when we last spoke to you pre-elections in November, we discussed who might win, of course, and was it Kamala Harris or Trump? But we said even then, I think, that Trump is in a rush because he's a second-term president. By midterms have happened, he'll become a lame duck unless he's allowed to sit for a third term. So will companies just think, well, we'll weather the Trump chaos and he'll be gone in 3.5 years' time? He'll be powerless or less powerful in barely 2 years, and this will be a fever dream. It won't be a problem going forward. Or is the fear that whoever comes next, if it's J.D. Vance, he could be even worse? So they better start jumping to the tune of Trump.
Well, you've got a short-term issue here. That's the first thing that they need to deal with. If you are importing products into this country to make other products or buying things here in the United States and trying to sell them, you've got a short-term problem if these tariffs remain in place. So whether they like it or not, they've got to deal with this right now. In 2 years, I can tell you, Chris, right now, they're gambling and their bet on this tariff strategy better play out for the Trump administration, or else they will get slaughtered in the next election. The Republicans are barely hanging on to majority in the House. And if this goes the wrong way, and if it's true, which it's rare to hear a president of the United States say, well, we might have 6 months of pain. And he said that. Now, that's unlike Trump, first of all, and unlike anything you want to hear from the leader of your country. But it will get better. I'll tell you what, it better get better because the Republicans will get slaughtered.
No leader likes to say anything about pain, let alone 6 months with the electorate. I guess he's burning through his political capital as you do in all of life. I think you burn through capital as soon as you get a big job, and by the end it's just gone. The question is, when has it disappeared? It's been talked about the Liz Truss example here. Liz Truss tried to do things in quite a rush. She cut the top rate of tax, income tax, to 40% from 45%. Yeah. She did other things too, and she spooked the markets, and the bond market
sure did.
Killed her off. Is Truss a warning for Trump?
Well, obviously, your political system works a little bit differently. I mean, we've got President Trump for 4 years, whether people like it or not. That's who we've got. But I am certain that there are people looking at the situation and what happened to your Prime Minister, Liz Truss, and saying, "This, you don't want to repeat of this, Mr. President. You're not going anywhere." But all these people who are going to be up in the election, which is a year and a half, and I'm already getting requests for fundraising. Okay. I mean, there are people in that House of Representatives that are very nervous.
Yeah. There's been some chatter here, Gerry, that our Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, hasn't spoken, as things stand, by the way, at Thursday lunchtime, with President Trump since a week last Sunday, so 3 days before Liberation Day, when the tariffs came in. Why is that a problem? I mean, how would you weigh up what we call the special relationship at the moment?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. I thought that the Prime Minister did an excellent job when he was here in Washington, D.C. He left, I think, with his head high. He seemed to get along very nicely with the President of the United States and went back to the UK. And now we haven't heard much about them having any kind of dialogue. You know, the relationship that we have with the United Kingdom is that you buy more from us, from the United States government, or from the U.S. manufacturer.
I think that's right on manufacturing. On services, it's the other way around.
Services.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, correct. So that's a good question, Chris. I don't think that there is any damage that's going on here between this special relationship because, frankly, I think the UK came out pretty good on this whole tariff situation, with the exception of the auto. I mean, he's not changing on the autos.
No, 25%.
Your Jaguars and your Land Rovers are still part of that. But boy, you know, the UK is not the target.
No,
and has never been.
No, he's Anglophile president, isn't he? In a way that Obama wasn't, and Biden really wasn't. He's obviously Irish and had an issue. Well, I said he wasn't as friendly as you might expect with the UK. And I guess we can make more of that as we go forward as a country, can we?
Yeah, the President Trump loves Europe. I mean, I don't think there's any question about it. He loves the UK. He doesn't particularly like the European Commission.
No.
You know, and when you talk about negotiating, when you talk about trying to get some kind of tariff deals done, I suspect he would rather do that one-on-one with the UK, Vietnam, Thailand, India, etc., as opposed to having to go to an entire block of a group that, frankly, is really bureaucratic. And I think that is his issue.
He was, I mean, I remember vividly, I think he was in the UK when the Brexit vote happened in 2016. Is one of his golf courses, I think, before, of course, the November elections for Trump won. And I think he talked about how optimistic he was about Brexit. I just wonder whether his behaviour this week is will almost force this government in this country to get to grips with the powers that Brexit gave them and almost embrace the ideas of Brexit.
Chris, that's a really good point, and I've said that to others as well, which is that the UK, because you're not part of the European Union, is in a unique place to have some sort of relationship and dialogue with this President of the United States. Because, again, he is a negotiator, and one-on-one is what he likes.
Yeah.
And as a result, I would think, well, that the United Kingdom not having to be part of a bloc is something that he could begin to negotiate. I mean, they say that there's 75 countries. I mean, I can't get a hotel room in here next week for some guests that are coming into town.
Wow.
They are saying that there are 75 countries with their delegations all lining up, waiting to get a meeting with the president over over these trade deals. It's pretty astonishing.
The
UK ought to be at the top of the list and shouldn't have to stick around and stay in hotels.
Yeah. Well, we haven't spoken the two principles, but yet again he's using, isn't he, kind of raw politics to get the deal he wants, like a businessman. He doesn't really care how he gets there. He wants the deal. He's going to get 75 deals over 90 days.
Yeah, well, and what they're saying, I listened very closely to their words last night, which is we had 75 countries asking for meetings, and so we had to do something. We can't meet one-on-one right now. And they all wanted deals right now. So their words, and this is coming out of Commerce, Treasury, and the trade rep, is, well, we just had to do this. Pause, because we just can't meet with everybody right now to get this done. Of course, the detractors are saying, well, bond market didn't look so good, and we've lost $5 trillion worth of market value since you've done these, and it went up again yesterday.
Yeah.
So like I said, somewhere in between is the truth.
Do you think corporate America is regretting backing Trump? I mean, we saw behind the president in the rotunda, big tech lined up, other companies. I mean, they all felt they had to go along and support the new president. I mean, and now they're feeling, well, he's challenging our business model. He's forcing us to reshore jobs, and that'll cost more in our labor costs.
I'm not going to tell you that there's buyer's remorse, but I mentioned to you that there's 75 countries that are waiting to sit down with the president. The list of U.S. and international corporations wishing to have meetings with him is 10 times that. Yeah. Because they all want to go in and make their case as to why what he's doing right now could be horribly damaging to manufacturing. So buyer's remorse, no, not yet. When the American people themselves in these red states start feeling it or start losing jobs, then he needs to start to worry.
But you see, you said that damage to manufacturing. He would say he's boosting manufacturing by forcing these jobs to come back to onshore USA. Maybe that's but again, that takes some time, and he may not have time.
Well, and I think that's the issue, Chris. It does take some time. And if you're looking at a 1.5-year cycle here for him to hold on to power here in Washington, D.C., I'm sure that some of these companies can say, yes, Mr. President, we're going to do this, which, by the way, they have said we're going to do it. But they're not driving piles into the ground right now to build these facilities. Yeah.
Just a final question for you, Gerry Gunster. I first met you through Nigel Farage, of course, out in 2016, I think, for January 2017 for the Trump inauguration. I was out there covering it for the Telegraph. Farage is playing a very interesting game. Now, we thought he was the Trump whisperer. We thought he was the person who would be this kind of backdoor to Trump for the Labour administration, given the criticism levied at the Trump by the Labour MPs in opposition. But since Trump came in January, Farage, hasn't spoken to Trump. There's been no communication. And he said on GB News on Thursday morning when we interviewed him, he said he feels he doesn't want to cut across the communication lines between the government and the Trump administration. So he's kind of playing ball, isn't he, in an unusual, maybe an un-Farage-like way.
I think there's two reasons for that. And I think the first reason is, as you know, Nigel's a good friend of mine, good colleague. He is a very busy man right now. I mean, you look up, he's somewhere giving speeches, giving lectures. He is obviously building quite a party over there for reform. And I think that is his absolute focus and should be. Now, that said, if Nigel Farage wanted to pick up the phone and get a hold of the President of the United States, he would do it. Nigel is, as you know, just not one of those guys that is going to do something like that unless it is of the utmost importance, because Nigel has a job to do to build this reform party. And the President of the United States, as you can see, has his job to do. I don't think that the fact that there hasn't been any, quote unquote, talks with each other means anything.
And also I think, I know that Farage is a patriot and he's offering to help if he's wanted, but he won't force himself. He understands now he's an MP. He can't cut across the lines into Trump. When he wasn't an MP, it's different. Now you're part of the establishment. I mean, it's a further example, perhaps, of Farage growing up as a politician.
Yes, it is. And I agree with you. He is, as I said, trying to build a party over there. And I will say, too, that, and you know Nigel as well, Nigel is loyal, Nigel is respectful. I mean, and that is the one thing that he's got with Trump, and Trump feels the same way about him.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean because they aren't, playing golf on a Sunday afternoon that anything has happened to that relationship.
I guess Trump gets it. Well, listen, I'll hopefully see you soon back in the UK for some golf, maybe, Gerry Gunster. Gerry Gunster, thank you. Next up, ID cards. Remember them from Tony Blair's government? Well, now 3 big groups of Red Wall Labour MPs think they provide a possible solution to cracking down on illegal migration, stopping migrants disappearing into the black economy, if you like, boosting public sector productivity and, as I say, clamping down on illegal migration. Labour MP Jake Richards joins me now to explain why. Jake, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast. Why are you calling for the introduction of digital IDs?
For lots of reasons, Chris. Look, the truth is we're moving into an era of digital ID, whether we like it or not. We know that we share more and more of our data with private companies using our smartphones and also the public sector as well. So the government does have a lot of data about us, whether that's by the NHS, by the DWP. And we've seen that the government are also moving to more digital forms of verifying our ID. So digital driving license, e-visas and passports. What we're calling for is the government to be ambitious and to take advantage of this. And we've seen those benefits from elsewhere in the world, and we want to realise them here too.
We already have elements of this, don't we, through the national insurance number we all have if we're employed, when we get one, in fact, when we're 16 from the States. And also we have, if you're, for example, with using the HMRC portal, you have a long number with them, don't you? And also there's NHS checks. So there is an element of digital ID already out there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, no one's pretending that what we're saying and some of the MPs who were supporting this letter are saying is kind of new and completely groundbreaking. What we're trying to do is urge the government to be a bit more ambitious, to go a bit further, to go a bit faster on this agenda, because we think there are real benefits that can be gleaned. Look, a lot of this data already exists. A lot of us have different forms of identification. I think there's sort of 100 different ways you can log into government services online. What we want to do is make it more simple for the individual, for the citizen to access public services, to use their data to get a better deal from the state, but also better for government to be able to tailor the services for our needs. Obviously, there are privacy concerns and there are issues that will have to be looked at. But actually, I think we've moved a long way from the ID cards debate back in the noughties. And, I haven't heard him say it myself, but people tell me that David Davis, who was sort of the big opponent to ID cards back in the noughties, now supports digital ID. And I think that is a pretty good sign that debate has shifted. And the government is doing a lot of this. So, we're not sort of saying the government has to completely U-turn or change course. A lot of this is happening in different departments. We're saying it should be joined up, worked across government, and that would be much more efficient and more effective for everyone.
Government seems nervous about this, Jake Richards. When we asked them earlier this week about this in response to your letter, they said we have no plans for mandatory digital ID cards. That's not the route we're going down. Is that what you're calling for, mandatory ones?
I mean, I don't think anyone is saying that mandatory digital ID, coming in any time soon is even really vaguely on the agenda. I don't think anyone is seriously suggesting that. There are a lot of my constituents don't have smartphones, don't have a computer at home, and I certainly don't suggest that they should have to go and get one. But what we are saying is this is happening, as I've already said and repeatedly said. The government are already bringing in sort of millions of new digital driving licenses. Let's make sure that in 10, 15, 20 years' time, we don't look back and say, God, we missed a really golden opportunity to make this comprehensive, ambitious.
Is it seen as an attempt? The Civil Liberties Brigade would say it's not very British to have this kind of, show your ID card. They would sort of say things like papers, please, going back to some form of, authoritarian state. That's how they see it. What's your answer to them?
Well, I think some of the backlash to this idea actually hasn't been that big. There isn't a big group saying that this is all really dangerous. The dystopian vision that they paint is not quite right. When actually the difference between kind of the old-fashioned digital ID, or you have to show something to get access to A, B, and C, is that actually digital technology means that we can own our data and we can see how it's being used much more. The example I always use is Estonia, a very different country to ours. It's much smaller. I get that. There are huge differences. But what they have is an access point whereby the individual, the citizen, can sort of see how their data is being used, can say, no, I don't want to share that with government, or I do want to share that with government for this reason. And it goes back to this very basic, simple of the social contract. And in my mind, the digital ID empowers both the citizen and the state to sort of improve that social contract for both sides.
Yeah.
And whereas the ID card was a bit one way, citizen has to get it to access A, B, C. This is slightly more holistic, slightly more, it's a different kind of concept, Chris. And so look, obviously there are still security concerns with it. There are privacy concerns. I'm not saying we just click our finger and this happens overnight. All of that stuff would have to be addressed and thought through very carefully. But again, I think that's another reason why the government should get on and do that.
Yeah. I'm old enough, I'm afraid, to have one of the original sample ID cards produced by the Labour government back in, goodness me, 2027 or 2007 or 2008. So I've been around. It's about the same size, by the way, for viewers and listeners, as a kind of one of those modern day driving licenses, and it's about the same colour with the same kind of decorations on it. So it's quite interesting to have one there. But yeah, you're right. I guess, would it be a way of vetting workers, stopping people arriving here and then sliding into the black economy and working that way and being here illegally but earning money?
I think lots of people always ask me is, why do so many people try and get to the UK illegally? There's lots of reasons for that. Partly our language, partly our economy, partly maybe family links or what have you. But one reason certainly is there is a pretty healthy black economy here where people can work illegally. We know that. And this would be a really useful tool in trying to counter that, which would certainly help in the battle against illegal migration. I'm for a minute suggesting this is a golden bullet which is going to solve all the problems, send back the boats. I do think it could be a useful tool in the armoury of counter this. And it's not me just saying that. It's a lot of other organisations like Labour Together, an important think tank, and others. So, I think it could be a useful tool in that battle.
I've got to ask you, while I've got you, about the issue of grooming gangs. Before you elected MP for Rother Valley, you were a barrister. You represented victims of child abuse and rape in court. Really, really important work. Is the government right, as it appears, not to proceed with these 5 local inquiries that they announced in January?
Well, my understanding is the Home Secretary today's been on the media. I haven't seen her myself, but is actually kind of pushing back on a lot of some of the misinformation, she's called it, that's been spread. Local authorities will still be given sorry, my daughter in the background, Chris, is making some noise, forgive me. But the local authorities will still be given the resources and the powers to hold these inquiries in areas as they see fit. And I think that's a good way of doing it. Local inquiries are better. We also have Dame Louise Casey's rapid audit into these awful crimes that are happening, so we have a better sense of where and the scale of it. But really importantly, Chris, I do repeat this over and over again, we've had a national inquiry into grooming gangs, which concluded in 2022. There's 20 recommendations. I want the government to implement as many of those as possible, as quickly as possible. That should be right at the priority of this government. And today the Home Secretary is saying that the government is taking further action to crack down on these criminals and these evil people, and that's what I'll be supporting.
Well, you're referring to the J inquiry, which only had one strand looking at these rape gangs, not the whole thing. Do you not think this time we need a national inquiry into this to get the thing dealt with, lance the boil, lance the kind of the concern we're seeing from certainly from GB News viewers and listeners?
I think we should implement the recommendations from the last national inquiry. I think where there are local inquiries needed, they should happen. I'm pleased that the government is giving quite a lot of money towards that. If it needs more, then I'll be calling for more. Let's deal with the criminals these crimes are still happening. We know that, and that needs to be the priority, is stopping these crimes happening.
I'm just finally on this. Is there a nervousness about dealing with it because a lot of the perpetrators were Pakistani heritage groups? There was a feeling that if you went after these perpetrators, it looked like you were being racist in some way, but for the authorities. Is that, you live and breathe in the communities where some of this happened. Is that what you feel? Is that a concern?
I'm not scared about that at all, Chris. I can be very, very straight. My constituency is in Rotherham. We had a real problem with gangs, which were predominantly Pakistani males, raping mainly white girls. Now, that was a problem. We had the KCJ report back over a decade ago, which concluded that one of the reasons that wasn't dealt with strongly enough was because of fears of being racist. Now, that cannot happen again. And that was over a decade ago. So I have absolutely no problems with talking about those issues in those terms and anything to stop that happening again. As you said before, I've worked with victims of these awful offences. I know the devastating effect it has on them and their families. I continue to speak with survivors regularly, both as a constituency MP, but also because of my former job. And I know the effect this has. I speak to survivors of child sexual exploitation, child abuse all the time, both because of my role as an MP, but also because of my role representing them as a barrister before I was elected as an MP. And the most important thing is getting justice for them and stopping these crimes happening again. And if that means calling out what the reality is, and people saying, some people say that's racist, and so be it, I don't care. We have to stop these crimes from being committed. And that shouldn't be controversial because, as I said, 2 inquiries have already taken place and made those facts very clear.
And just finally, we're expecting the review report from Baroness Casey, Louise Casey, shortly, probably by the end of this month. I think MPs were told this week. If she says it's time for a national inquiry, should there be one?
Well, I think we'd have to listen to Dame Louise Casey very, very, very carefully on that. And if that's the conclusion she comes to, then I hope the government will listen to what she has to say.
Look, Gerry Richards, thank you for joining us. You've got a sick child, others aren't well in your family, your own Rother Valley. Very kind to join us on a busy time for MPs now that the Parliament's broken up. Thank you for joining us.
You've joined us in difficult circumstances, Chris, but it's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Gerry Richards, thank you. Now, today, on the day this podcast goes out, Friday, is World Parkinson's Day, and I'm joined now by Rory Cellan-Jones, a former senior BBC reporter and the co-host of another great podcast, the Movers and Shakers podcast, which looks at the realities of living with Parkinson's. Rory Cellan-Jones, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast.
Great to be here, Chris.
Thanks for coming on. Great to have you on. Just very briefly, for any of the listeners or viewers who aren't familiar with Parkinson's, what is it?
Well, it's the world's fastest growing neurological disease. And it's a very good question, what is it? Because it's very different to all sorts of different people. There are 46 different symptoms. The one everybody is familiar with is a tremor. I've got a tremor. Quite a lot of people don't have a tremor. But it's what's happening is that the dopamine neurons in your brain are being gradually destroyed. And that makes all sorts of movements very difficult, and there are all sorts of other symptoms too. And it can be fast moving or it can be slow moving. Luckily, mine is moving reasonably slowly, but 6 years into diagnosis, I'm beginning to notice the effects more and more.
And on your podcast, Movers and Shakers, each host has different symptoms to demonstrate those different stages of Parkinson's. Is that right?
Well, we're a motley crew. We range from, a judge, Sir Nicholas Mostyn, used to be Britain's top divorce lawyer, represented Paul McCartney and was then a distinguished judge, to Jeremy Paxman, Mark Mardell, who you'll have worked with, I'm sure, Gillian Lacey Solomar. And yeah, we do vary. Gillian, for example, the one woman who is a young onset person, someone who got it well before she was in her late 40s and has had it for 10 years. And she is one of 2 of our members who've had deep brain stimulation, which is one of the treatments for it. There is no drug yet that can actually reverse it or modify the disease in any way. There are lots of drugs that we all take to sort of mask our symptoms, but there's a big quest for a drug to actually stop it.
Well, let's hope your podcast works in raising awareness of it. You've got Paul Mayhew Archer, the co-writer of The Vicar of Dibley, as part of your gang of co-hosts. How important is humour and keeping a positive mentality, do you think, in coping and dealing with Parkinson's?
Well, we aim to show light and shade in all our episodes, and yes, Paul is great. Paul, as you say, is a comedy script writer. He too has had deep brain stimulation, and he manages to turn it into comedy. He's got late in life, he's become a stand-up comedian. He previously been in the background as a producer and a script writer, but he now tours the country with Parkinson's groups telling jokes about Parkinson's.
Yes.
And he's very funny. And obviously it's important. But we have a serious message too. We've been going 2 years and we've been outraged to hear from our audience how poor the treatment of Parkinson's is in this country. And we've developed something called the Parky Charter with 5 demands for better treatment. And the main one amongst them is just the shortage of neurologists. People who think they may have Parkinson's are waiting far too long to even get an appointment. And we've heard from lots of them who've basically despaired and gone private just to get into the system and, get going, because living with that uncertainty is terrible.
You'll be heading to Downing Street, won't you, on the day this podcast goes out to perform a concert of sorts. But I've got to ask you, what's the best joke about Parkinson's Paul Mayhew just told you?
He was saying to me the other day, there is concern that one of the dangers of Parkinson's is you could be encouraged to take your own life. But luckily, he said, another symptom of Parkinson's is apathy. So couldn't be bothered.
You can't be bothered. I love the dark humour. I think that would appeal to a lot of people going through what you're going through. It gets you through the day, and that's so important. You've had Health Secretary Wes Streeting on your podcast too, when he's in the shadow cabinet. Has he been helpful now he's got the big job in government running the health service?
Well, we are holding them to account because we fortunately booked him before we knew there was going to be a general election, and then he still came on during the general election campaign, and he made a promise about extra neurology appointments. So we are very much, trying to
Good.
nail that to the wall, as it were. In fact, we've got one of these parliamentary petitions out right at the moment saying what must be done, what we need enacted from our Parky Charter. So people can sign that. We've got over 20,000 signatures on that. So yes, we're determined to hold the government to account on that.
Good. How concerned have you been about the recent government cuts to PIP, the personal independence payments?
Yeah, I mean, that's another big issue for our listeners. I mean, we had an episode on PIP. The extraordinary thing with that is the process people go through to get evaluated. And people told us horror stories of somebody going for an interview and being told, "Well, I know you're not that good at the moment, but maybe in 6 months or so you'll be better and ready to work." Not understanding that Parkinson's is a one-way street, and it's downhill. You don't get better from it.
Well, that's shocking. It's all about attitude and getting people to understand it. I mean, do you think the government is failing people with disabilities at the moment, or where do you sit with this? I mean, they've got to save money somehow. The Tories were going to do bigger welfare cuts.
I write about health and technology a lot, and I do have some sympathies. I mean, the health service is facing huge short-term difficulties. It needs to have a much longer-term plan, a prevention, early diagnosis, and all that, which I'm incredibly in favour of.
Yeah. But
at the same time, there is the battle for to clear huge waiting lists and to fight fires in the short term. So I do sympathise, but I think it's important that patient groups like ours, keep up the pressure. And it's not just about money. It's about, for instance, I'm a big advocate of sharing data. I think we're far too cautious. I know people are worried about the privacy of their data. I'm more worried about, frankly, my data not being used to research cures.
When you were at the BBC, you were their technology editor. In fact, you were called RoryCathleenJones.com by some of the presenters, if I remember rightly.
Eddie Mayer used to call me.
Eddie Mayer, that's right, on Radio 4. I mean, do you think AI is overblown as the silver bullet? I mean, the government's putting a lot of effort into getting that right and thinks that can be a way of spotting early onset, maybe help with Parkinson's, identifying it early, getting treatment in early.
I think AI is important. There are lots of people doing great work on the potential of AI in healthcare. One of the key things one always hears about is drug development. Cutting the extraordinary time it takes to develop drugs, but there's still a huge amount of bureaucracy around that process. We had a drug that everyone hoped was going to make a difference, a diabetes drug called exenatide, and it had its final results in the last year. Everyone holding on with bated breath, and it turned out to be a complete flop.
Yep.
And I looked at how long it had taken to get there, and the first trials of an existing drug, this was not a novel drug, had taken place 16 years ago.
Gosh.
So cutting that time, is about far more than AI. AI can help, but there are all sorts of systems, and for instance, the difficulties in sharing data across the NHS, which are slowing things down.
Well, look, Rory, Catherine James, all the best with all this. I've got to ask about your dog. It's somewhat of a Twitter star. Is your dog with you now? Have you better tell?
She's upstairs. She's sulking a bit because my wife's gone out. I mean, she's had a traumatic day because the gas man came to service the boiler. She hates people coming to the house. So you're lucky that that's not happening because she'd be...
And who is she and where did she come from again?
She's a Romanian rescue dog. We got her 2.5 years ago, just before Christmas. And she proved to be the shyest dog on earth and actually spent most of the first 6 months behind our sofa. And she became an internet superstar. Yes. The DJ, Nick Grimshaw, who said at Christmas, "I can't believe everybody's not following the extraordinary story of Sophie from Romania." So,
how do people follow the story on your X feed?
Well, I've X has gone dormant for me, but mostly Instagram, where I'm Rory Ketlan, RORYCELLAN, on Instagram. So that's
lovely.
The place to put it. And on Blue Sky.
Well, we'll stay tuned. And best of luck with you're doing some choir on Friday. Yep.
Got an event. We're going to be singing outside Parliament. Our anthem, which is called "We Will Survive." If you go on YouTube, you'll find it.
Good.
We will survive.
You really will.
By one of the movers and shakers.
Well, your human spirit shines through today on Chopper's Political Podcast. It's great to see you, Rory Kettle-James, doing so well and taking this fight to the gates of number 10 Downing Street. It's really good to have you on. Thank you for joining us today on Chopper's Political Podcast. And thank you earlier to our guests, Jake Richards and Gerry Gunster. Thank you to you for listening wherever you are. I hope you've enjoyed the show. I tweet at Christopher Hope on X. Tweet me. Tell me what you think, ideas for guests and all that. And email me, chopper@gbnews.uk. If you really enjoyed the show, please do tell your friends. And if you really enjoyed it even more than that, please leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. That helps other people to find it. Thanks to the great team of GB News colleagues behind the podcast, Mick Booker and Jeff Marsh back at the GB News mothership in Paddington, and the worker bees here in our studio in Westminster, Rebecca Nunes and George McMillan. They love being called worker bees. Do call them that on Twitter. They're on Twitter too. Most importantly of all, thank you to you for listening wherever you are. If you want more Chopper in your life, and who doesn't, the worker bees do catch me during the week on GB News with your latest political updates and stories and analysis, doing the best I can to make sense of the world of Westminster for you at GB News, wherever you are. And keep up to date with our best reporting of politics on our website, gbnews.com. But until next time, cheerio!